Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma Upadhyay. Let's get started.
Gravitas, co-presented by SBI Mutual Fund, a partner for life. Skoda Superb, best in next class. Co-powered by Star Health Insurance, the health insurance specialist. Amstrad, get real, get Amstrad.
Europe opened its doors to Muslim immigrants. Europe debated its open borders and refugee policies. Europe even sat in judgment of countries that took tough measures to clamp down on extremism. There is no politically correct way of saying this. Europe is bearing the brunt of being too open, too welcoming, and perhaps too blind to the threat extremism poses. I run the risk of painting all immigrants and refugees as extremists. They're not. But how do you tell? In the last 1 week, Europe has seen 3 terror attacks, all by Muslim immigrants. All in the name of faith. A crackdown has begun, but a concerted effort is still not underway. On Gravitas tonight, we discuss how this is a pivotal moment for the continent and how 3 leaders are responsible for the latest spiral of violence. Recep Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey, Imran Khan of Pakistan, and Mahathir Mohamad of Malaysia. Today, Al-Qaeda has threatened to kill French President Emmanuel Macron. Last week, Mahathir Mohamad had justified killing. What's the difference between the two then? When so-called elected leaders of state endorse terror attacks, the world becomes a very dangerous place. And we're seeing that happen now. Also on the show, it's election day in America. We bring you ground reports from polling centers and analysis. How big is the Indian-American vote? Will this election be decided in courts? 5 FAQs answered on the show tonight. And food politics in presidential elections. From masala dosa to paneer tikka, we tell you why they're trending in the US and here in India. But we begin, as always, with Gravitas Global Headlines.
According to reports, the World Health Organization concealed concessions to China and also sacrificed its best chance to unravel the virus's origins during the beginning of the pandemic. India, the United States, Japan and Australia have commenced the first phase of the Malabar Quadrilateral naval exercises from today in the Bay of Bengal. The 3-day joint drills comes at a time when India and China are locked in a bitter border standoff in eastern Ladakh that has significantly strained ties. India has taken on Pakistan at the United Nations for cross-border terrorism. Indian diplomat Ashish Sharma said that hate speech by Pakistan is not merely directed towards one community in India, but also against organizations, individuals, and even high-ranking political leaders. The death toll from Monday's attack on Kabul University has risen to at least 35, with most of them being students. 50 people had been wounded in the attack, which has been claimed by the Islamic State. Gunmen had stormed Kabul University, shooting at students in their classrooms and clashing with security forces. As mass anti-government protests build across Thailand and calls for reform of the monarchy grow, King Maha Vajiralongkorn has called his country the land of compromise. His comments are being viewed as a suggestion of a way out of the months-long political impasse. North Korea is building 2 new submarines, including one capable of firing ballistic missiles, according to a South Korean lawmaker, following a closed-door briefing by the South's National Intelligence Service. North Korea has a large submarine fleet, but only one known experimental submarine capable of carrying a ballistic missile. A 4-year-old girl is pulled out of the rubble 91 hours after the quake struck the Turkish city of Izmir. The overall death toll in the quake now stands at 100, with more than 900 injured in the quake. Rescuers and volunteers raced to save about 100 pilot whales stranded on Sri Lanka's western coast and the country's biggest mass beaching. This is the largest single pod of whales stranded in Sri Lanka so far. Former Australia all-rounder Shane Watson has announced his retirement from all forms of cricket. The 39-year-old confirmed the decision on Tuesday after the end of Chennai Super Kings' IPL campaign. Watson had already retired from internationals in 2016, but continued to ply his trade in T20 leagues across the world. Watson hit a century in the 2018 IPL final to help CSK win the title and was also part of the Rajasthan Royals side that won the inaugural IPL title. He will be remembered as one of the finest overseas players in IPL history. Manchester United legend and Wales manager Ryan Giggs has been arrested on suspicion of assault. Giggs is alleged to have attacked his girlfriend Kate Greville in their home in Greater Manchester on Sunday, a charge that the 46-year-old denies. Giggs was taken in for questioning and later released on bail pending further inquiry. His representatives say he is cooperating with the police. The Welsh FA announced that Giggs will not be involved in the Wales' 3 matches in November. His assistant Robert Page will be in charge.
Oh ja. Oh mein Gott.
For the third time in a week, Europe has been struck by a terror attack. First, it was the beheading of a school teacher in Paris. Then 3 people were stabbed to death in Nice. And now there's been an attack in Vienna in Austria. This wasn't a lone wolf strike. A group of attackers opened fire. It was just before a new lockdown came into force. People were out and about. They wanted to get out one more time, perhaps, before the month-long lockdown. That's when terrorists struck. At least 5 people have died, several are injured. We have 2 eyewitness accounts. These people were present when the shooting began. Listen to them.
Fing diese an und die nicht war. Vor allem alle Leute an der Straße draußen, die sind auch nur noch kurz da waren oder irgendetwas anderes. Dann war es noch näher und dann sind wir dadurch wir nicht wussten, ob wir in die richtige Richtung gehen, sind wir gelaufen in ein Hotel und uns dort versteckt.
Ich war drinnen, plötzlich ist er stürmt. Und nicht rausgehen, da ist er. Ich habe gesagt, Spaß. Das ist ja wahrscheinlich. Oder die Gäste haben zu viel getrunken, haben wirklich gedacht. Und ich habe meine Frau ich habe Schüsse gehört, sicher innerhalb 15 bis 20 Schüsse. Und ja, da auch neugierig. Nein, ihr bleibt jetzt drinnen, Tür zugemacht, nicht zugesperrt, aber gemacht und drinnen dann ist die Polizei gekommen, also ihr bleibt drinnen, weil da vorne ist und innerhalb von 3-4 Minuten 10, 15 Polizeiwagen, Gott sei Dank, gewesen. Und ja,
this is similar to what happened in France, an Islamist terror attack involving an Islamic State sympathizer targeting innocent civilians, and that too in a public place. 6 different locations were targeted. The local police still doesn't know how many attackers were involved, how many of them were on the streets. But they managed to neutralize one of the suspects. This was 9 minutes into the attack. This is the suspected ISIS sympathizer, the terrorist and reportedly the mastermind, a 20-year-old man of North Macedonian origin. Last year, he was convicted for trying to join the ISIS. Reports say he was on his way to Syria to join the group. He was supposed to serve a 22-month prison sentence, but he was released early. The terrorist had an Austrian passport. One of the locations where he was spotted was a synagogue. A rabbi who saw him had this to say.
Gesehen, wie der Angreifer ganz offensichtlich.
I saw how the heavily armed attacker with a long rifle shot at people outside bars and restaurants last night. It was a warm evening, and the night before the lockdown, a lot of people probably wanted to go out. I don't think there were as many people out as the previous night, but the attacker was aiming at them.
Wirklich so viele Menschen da waren wie in der Nacht zuvor, glaube ich nicht. Also es war.
Just like France, the response of Austria has been fierce. Several people have been arrested. Many homes have been searched. Investigators found an address linked to the terrorist mastermind. They've searched 15 houses close to that location. The Austrian Chancellor has pledged to use all means available to investigate this attack.
Ich habe den Innenminister.
I've asked the Minister of Interior to use all available forces to investigate this attack. In the meantime, the Austrian armed forces have fully taken over the protection of property in Vienna, so that the police can concentrate all their forces on the investigation. We have also convened the National Security Council to discuss the current situation and the next steps with all relevant authorities of the Republic, and together with the Federal President, the representatives of the parliamentary parties, the Mayor of Vienna and Vice Chancellor, we will also commemorate the victims of the attack today.
Bürgermeister und dem Vizekanzler.
French President Emmanuel Macron has extended his support too. Today he visited the Austrian embassy in Paris. He signed a book of condolence there. Countries across Europe have raised their guard. After the Nice attack, France deployed 7,000 soldiers to guard schools and places of worship. Reports say the UK has also stepped up the vigil. British intelligence agencies are trying to preempt potential copycat attacks in the UK. So this is what it looks like. Europe is on alert. What started as anger against a cartoon may well turn into a wave of terror attacks. What we are witnessing now is also the surge of terrorism across this continent in Europe. It's not just France or Austria that face this threat. Radicalism has been growing around Europe, and European leaders are waking up to the threat posed by political Islam. On Monday, France struck back. More than 50 jihadists linked to Al-Qaeda were killed in an airstrike in Mali. France has been fighting a long and drawn-out battle against extremism in this region. In return, President Macron now has a target on his head. Al-Qaeda is threatening to attack the French president. It said that killing anyone who insults the Prophet is the right of every Muslim. Islamist extremism has become Europe's reality, and now is the time for its leaders to take action.
Islam is a religion that is in crisis today all over the world. We don't just see it in our country. It is a deep crisis that is linked to tensions between fundamentalisms, precisely religious and political projects, which, as we can see in all parts of the world, are leading to radicalism, even in countries where Islam is the majority religion.
With those words, Emmanuel Macron painted a target on his back. He said Islam is a religion in crisis. What followed was a major backlash from the Muslim world. Protesters took to the streets. The Islamic world may have rejected Macron's message, but European leaders must take it as a wake-up call. It's a continent that is struggling with growing radicalism. In 2019, there were 119 attempted attacks in Europe. Out of these, 21 were linked to jihadist terrorism. In 2020, the attacks in France and Austria mark a resurgence of terrorism in Europe. The challenge is collective. The response isn't. Different European countries are trying to deal with terror threats with their own unique measures. Austria banned foreign funding for Islamic groups in 2015. Germany made a push to train imams locally. Italy punished radical imams. By 2018, it had expelled 16 imams. Sweden axed government funding to 2 Muslim organizations. This included a Muslim Brotherhood youth group. Sweden said the group didn't fulfill the democracy requirement needed for government aid. Clearly, these limited measures were not enough. Europe needs a united front to challenge Islamism, a front that can collaborate with international partners. During his visit to Germany, India's Foreign Secretary highlighted the need for greater cooperation against terror networks. While raising the issue of growing radicalism in Europe, he said, "The terrorists are united in purpose and action, while we, the victims, are yet to be so." This is a pivotal moment for Europe. Leaders who pushed for open borders and sat in judgment of other countries that implemented tough measures are learning it the hard way. They need decisive action and a comprehensive approach. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Now here's a question. Why did this terror attack take place in Austria? The Islamic world is angry with France. They're apparently upset about the Prophet's cartoons. But Austria is not France, and Austria did not publish any cartoons. So why was it attacked? Because 3 men who call themselves leaders of their countries and of the Islamic faith have set in motion a very dangerous cycle. They've given moral legitimacy to violence in the name of religion. They've justified attacks, and now it has taken its own life. We've been saying this from day one. The statements of Turkey's President Erdogan, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan, and Malaysia's former PM Mahathir Mohamad are not just irresponsible and distasteful, they're downright dangerous. Unfortunately, we have proof now of how dangerous they are. The hatred they glorified has now claimed lives. Listen to what the Austrian Chancellor said today.
In the meantime, it has been confirmed that yesterday's attack was clearly an Islamist terrorist attack. It was an attack of hatred. Hatred for our basic values, hatred for our way of life, hatred for our democracy, where all people are equal in rights and dignity.
It was an attack of hatred, says Sebastian Kurz. Hatred for Austria's basic values, hatred for its way of life, and hatred for its democracy. Does this sound familiar to you? This is exactly what France is suffering, hatred being peddled as religious duty by some. Leaders like Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Imran Khan and Mahathir Mohamad have unleashed a deluge of hateful and bigoted statements against Europe. Their remarks almost always include violent metaphors and vilifying rhetoric against Europe. Let me take you back to what we've been reporting and what they've been saying. On the 28th of October, the Turkish president was outraged over Charlie Hebdo's cartoons. Do you know how he responded? He declared the enemies of Turkey to be the enemies of Islam. He made the two synonymous. He then accused the whole of Europe of trying to launch a crusade against Islam. He said the Turkish people will not look the other way. You must listen to the president.
They literally want to relaunch the Crusades. Since the Crusades, the seeds of evil and hatred have started falling on these lands, and that's when peace was disrupted. Will we renounce our honor for them? Will we look the other way because of them? Some might be able to do that. But the Turkish people cannot take an immoral approach in the face of any attack on their faith and values.
Do you know what happened next? Some 50 young men of Turkish descent went on a rampage at a Catholic church in Vienna shouting Allahu Akbar. This happened just 2 days after the Turkish president made the statement. And in those 2 days, another Islamic leader parroted Erdogan's views. He openly encouraged killing. I'm talking about the former Prime Minister of Malaysia, Mahathir bin Mohamad. He unleashed a Twitter storm for demonizing rhetoric. Mahathir Mohamad said, Muslims have a right to be angry and to kill millions of French people for the massacres of the past. He said Muslims have the right to punish the French, that even a boycott cannot compensate the wrongs committed by the French for all these years. He said, irrespective of what the religion professed, angry people kill. He endorsed murder. These are the words of a former Prime Minister. Then we come to a current Prime Minister, Imran Khan. He called the crackdown on extremism Islamophobia. He wrote to leaders of Muslim nations asking them to unite. Not once did he condemn the brutal acts of terror. Instead, he gave a free run to extremists to stage demonstrations against France. Demonstrations that looked like war drills. Protesters beheaded and burnt effigies of Emmanuel Macron. They called for his death. They vowed to send him to hell. Listen to what a cleric said at one such demonstration in Karachi.
हमारे आका मौला सल्लल्लाहु ताला अलैहि वसल्लम जो वजह तख्लीक कायनात हैं उनकी शान में बेअदबी की गई है हमसे ये बर्दाश्त नहीं है बेशक हुकूमत की जिम्मेदारी है कि वो गुस्ताख को वासिले जहन्नम करे वरना हुजूर के गुलाम इंशाअल्लाह जरूर उसको वासिले जहन्नम करेंगे.
And if you think that's too much, then take a look at this. This is from a school in Pakistan, a madrasa, a teacher carrying out a mock beheading in front of her students. This was a training session to kill those who insult Prophet Muhammad. This is what young Pakistani girls are being taught in school. And in Europe, Islamic terrorists are putting these methods to use. They're beheading teachers and churchgoers. They're stabbing policemen, attacking churches and synagogues. From Paris to Nice to Vienna, some of the most peaceful European cities have come under attack. A cartoon has become an excuse for them to kill. And Islamic leaders are accusing Europe of launching a crusade against Islam. How many Muslims living in France and Vienna have been targeted by the governments in these countries? Last we checked, none. If there's anybody who wants a crusade, it is these Islamic leaders. Recep Tayyip Erdogan, Mahathir bin Mohamad and Imran Khan Niazi, all three of them have been giving moral support to terrorists by justifying violence. They deserve all the blame for the spate of terror attacks. There may not be any legal consequences for their words, but they should face diplomatic consequences. The world must ensure that these men are not allowed to whip up hate and channel violent prejudice. And it's here. Election day has arrived in the United States of America. American voters are writing the final chapter of the 2020 presidential election. The final one may be written in court, but they're voting nonetheless. There's anticipation in the air, expectations running high. Nearly 100 million American voters, 100 million, have already cast their ballot. That's about 47% of the registered voters across the country. Democrats and Republicans are trying to seize every possible opportunity to sway the remaining. Let's get you a sense of what's happening on the ground. We'll start with the situation which has been described as volatile by multiple headlines. The threat of violence and further unrest looms large in America. Corporates, companies, media houses, city governments and federal enforcement agencies, they're all preparing to deal with potential civil unrest and violence. This is the oldest and perhaps the most mature democracy in the world, as they call themselves. This is what's happening on election day. Concerns ranging from isolated violent incidents to a series of mass protests and widespread property damage. More than 3,600 troops have been activated to be on standby. Buildings in downtown New York City and Beverly Hills have been boarded up. Businesses have been instructed to sign up for crime alerts, and federal officials have installed a non-scalable fence around the White House. What about the presidential hopefuls, Donald Trump and Joe Biden? What are they up to? They've wrapped up their campaign rallies, and by all means, they must now be glued to their TV screens like a lot of other people in America and across the world. But before that, the two men made a final pitch to American voters. Their last rallies for 2020. What about the voters? What's on their mind? To say that they're anxious would be an understatement, perhaps. This is the most important election in American history, they say, and voters say no matter who wins, they're preparing for the worst.
Why am I boarding up is because of our safety. Our storefront got vandalized in May of 30th due to the unrest that took place in DC. So we don't want the storm to hit us twice.
I'll be honest, I'm a little worried. I obviously voted for Hillary in 2016, and I went in there very confident, thinking that we were going to come out with the win, and we did it. So, like I said, I'm hesitant, but I'm excited. I hope people realize the disgrace that we got into by voting for Trump in 2016.
I don't know. I'm going to try to stay away from the news shows for a while, do some lit drop, and then pray like crazy. I've got a ton of anxiety. I'm very nervous, but I'm optimistic. Because I think that the opposition, the Republican Party, has just spoken. They've just misread everybody's sentiment that we shouldn't be divided. We should be united. We should be about building people up instead of tearing people down.
The concerns are not unfounded. It could take days before the authorities announce the winner. The contest may morph into an election week if the competition is too close to call. So here are some numbers that you must know if the results take longer than expected. The voters are casting their ballot to elect 538 electors. This is the Electoral College. These are the people who will elect the president. To win the White House, a candidate must take an absolute majority of electoral votes. So 270 is the magic number. The Democrats need 270 votes to rebuild the blue wall. The Republicans need 270 to have Donald Trump back in the White House. Another magic number is 10. This presidential election is expected to come down to results in 10 key states. These states include Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Michigan, Florida, Iowa, and Ohio. All of them are essential for Donald Trump's win. They were essential in 2016. The opinion poll suggests that he is not doing very well in some of these states. And to add to that, Joe Biden could disrupt Republican electoral power in the remaining 4 states, the states of Georgia, Arizona, North Carolina, and Texas. It's a neck-and-neck battle, and it's clearly going down the wire. And the opinion polls have shown a lead for Joe Biden, but the pundits are tracking the battleground states now, where the fight between Joe Biden and Donald Trump is just too close for comfort. One of those states is Florida, where Biden has a lead of just 1.7 points. Our correspondent Sarah Walton is in Florida tracking this battleground state.
There's all really still to play for here in Florida, a key state that all presidential candidates on the way to the White House want to get their hands on because it comes with a large number of electoral votes, 29 electoral votes. And we are seeing some interesting signs from early voting here. Americans have had several days now over the last weeks or so where they could cast their vote early in person and also via mail. Many mail-in ballots this year being sent in by people who are concerned with the coronavirus pandemic and don't want to come out in public. But what we're seeing from those figures is that the number of Democrats casting their vote and the number of Republicans is almost equal. There's about 100,000 votes in it, which really is not a lot. And that is interesting because studies have shown that it's Democrats that are far more likely to vote earlier and Republicans that are more likely to show up on the final election day, which is today, Tuesday, here in the United States. Now, if that large turnout by Republican Trump supporters does happen today, on top of the early voting, I mean, that is a sign, perhaps, that Florida could be leaning towards electing Donald Trump again. It's still very early, and of course, a big caveat here is that looking at early voting numbers is a bit like reading tea leaves. Just because somebody has registered their affiliation with a party in the past doesn't mean they are going to vote that way this time round. So, as I say, still all here to play for here. Lots of questions. We'll hopefully start getting some answers in Florida once the polls close this evening.
Let's go straight to Hyderabad now. Syed Akbaruddin, India's former permanent representative to the United Nations, someone who's also served as a spokesperson of the Ministry of External Affairs and India's representative at the IAEA, joining us. Mr. Akbaruddin, welcome back to Gravitas.
Thank you very much, Palki, for having me again on Gravitas. In fact, enhancing my gravitas too.
Very kind of you to say that. So we saw voting day in two places, in Bihar in India, which has often been called a state where law and order has been a problem, and in America, which is supposed to be the world's oldest, it is the world's oldest, and supposed to be the most mature democracy in the world. But in America, we saw storefronts being boarded up, and there's fear of post-election violence. What explains this?
So what we witnessed in the United States is perhaps one of the most polarizing campaigns known to us. It's been a very divisive campaign, perhaps the most divisive in recent history. At times it's been surreal. A campaign amidst a pandemic which has cost lives of more than 230,000 Americans. And it's a campaign in which many of the fault lines of a democracy, which you usually associate with emerging democracies, were witnessed in the United States. It's a campaign racked by numerous anti-racism demonstrations, a campaign in which there was even an attempt to kidnap a governor of Michigan, a campaign in which the incumbent president has called into question the very process of electoral voting. Obviously, all this takes a toll, even in the most mature of democracies. So what we are seeing is an anxiety, a concern of a type not experienced before in the United States. It's manifested in various ways. It's manifested in, for example, social media platforms now providing new rules and regulations for announcing results. It's manifested in sporadic incidents of owners of stores boarding them just in case of violence. Now, that's one side of the story. On the other side, if you just look back and see, the US elections have been in a better place than what was envisaged, say, 4 to 6 months ago. At that stage, everybody was talking, would there even be adequate numbers of people coming to vote? Yet, there are more than 100 million people who have voted in advance, either through mail-in or through advance voting. And much of these votes have already been received. So there are certain mature elements that are good to see, that despite last time the mail-in vote or advance voting was just something in the vicinity of 40 million. This time it's more than 2.5 times that size, yet the system was able to adjust and adapt. Going forward, we will still have to see, because there are a plethora of issues which still remain to be addressed, given the patchwork of rules, regulations, and voting requirements that are there in different states. On the other hand, in India, in Bihar, there is a system that is in place through a centralized form of electoral organization through the Central Election Commission. That's not there in the United States. So you have each state coming up with a new set of rules, new set of regulations, new relaxations, new means of counting, etc., etc. These are two different conditions, but I take the point that what we are seeing in the world's oldest democracy is a new experience, largely because of the polarized campaign that we saw leading to this voting day today.
You know, I was only trying to drive home the contrast here. Donald Trump, 4 years back, set out to make America great again. I'm not sure how many people see it as greater than it was in 2016, and I'm not sure if Trump alone is to be blamed for the way things have ended up. do you think that this election is more than anything else a referendum on Donald Trump and what he's been able to do or not do in the past 4 years? This is more about Trump than about Biden.
That's one way of looking at it. Certainly, if you look at personalities, President Trump's outsized personality is one that has dominated his administration throughout. And surely, if there is a contrast between personalities, Donald Trump's personality is the one to make a choice. Either you support him or you don't like him. That's one way of looking at it. But a society like the United States, which is very diverse, also has a number of issues underpinning that divergence in terms of personalities. Because the outcome of this election is going to decide on a host of other things, on how to handle the pandemic, how to handle the economy, how to address social inequities, how to look at foreign policy options relating to Iran, to China, to multilateralism, how to look at regulation itself, how to go about addressing issues in the US Supreme Court, whether 15 are adequate or not, etc. So there are a whole host of issues. And that choice, whether it's in terms of a personality or in terms of a platform, is a cardinal choice which will have power implications down the line, whatever the outcome.
Do you think by this time tomorrow we'll have the result?
All we have to do is to look at Florida, because that's the bellwether state which Donald Trump had won last time. And there they have a system in place where the advance voting will also be counted and declared pretty quickly, because they have a tradition of having votes which are mailed in. Florida is essential for Donald Trump to find a pathway to 270. If he loses that, then all that is required is he loses one more state, because last time he got 306 electoral votes from the Electoral College, 306. Florida is 29. I'm not a mathematician, but that would mean 277. And one other state in the Midwest, if he loses, it's over. So watch out for Florida. That will give an indication. If Donald Trump wins Florida, then you're in for a longer count, because many of the Midwestern states will take a longer time to address the issues of these mail-in votes or advance voting, because they have only started counting today. It may take them time to get to the end of it. And one never knows what's going to happen in between that. So when we watch out for the election results, Florida will be key, followed by Georgia, or maybe North Carolina. These 3-4 Sun Belt states, if Donald Trump does well, it doesn't mean he's out of difficult straits, but it means that the election will take a longer time to decide. If he doesn't do well in one of these, certainly in Florida, then it's much more difficult for him to get back get to the pathway of 270. So Florida is going to be announcing its results starting at, I understand, 8:30 their local time. We don't have very long to go in that. And that will give a key pointer of whether this election results will come in quickly or it will take a longer drawn process.
Well, we'll be reporting it here on WION, because we're live non-stop on this broadcast for about 42 hours. But Florida is a state to watch. Florida, I believe, is also the state that took 2 presidential hopefuls to court back in the year 2000. I hope that story is not repeated. Thanks very much for the moment, Syed Akbaruddin, for joining us here on Gravitas.
Thank you very much, Palki.
So this is the biggest presidential election in the world. We've called it the biggest reality show on earth. It's dramatic, it's complicated, and it's left America more divided than ever before. Let me sum up this election in 5 points, under 10 minutes. Let's answer 5 FAQs. How is a US president elected? Will the next president be elected in court? What were the biggest issues and controversies in this election? How important is the Indian American vote? And what were the most defining moments of this election? We'll take them one by one. We'll start with the latest. Both Joe Biden and Donald Trump have deployed big teams of lawyers. Will this election be decided in a court of law? The answer is highly likely. I can give you two reasons why. Reason number one, Donald Trump himself, he may not accept the result if he loses, that is. He's been asked this question repeatedly in presidential debates and in interviews. Will he accept the result if he loses? Will he ensure a peaceful transfer of power? Donald Trump has never said yes, which means there's every chance he'll say no. He has already been questioning mail-in ballots. He has already said his lawyers will take over once voting ends. It's as if Donald Trump is preparing to move court, and he has every right to, by the way. He can ask for a recount, he can ask for the mail-in results to be declared null and void, and that would be a very big deal because 62.1 million votes have been cast on mail. Reason number two on why the results may be decided by courts. More than 400 election-related cases have already been filed in America. Many more are expected, mostly from the swing states or the battleground states, states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, Florida, and North Carolina. This is the most litigated presidential election in U.S. history. Has this happened before? Has a U.S. election been decided in court before? The answer is yes. In 1876, 5 justices sat on a commission that decided the presidential election. In 2000, the U.S. courts decided the George W. Bush versus Al Gore election. There was a month-long battle over who won the state of Florida. Bush won in the court, and he won the presidency. 20 years later, both Republicans and Democrats are preparing for a similar court face-off. One report says Republicans are looking to train thousands of lawyers to handle litigation surrounding Election Day, post-election canvassing and possible recounts. The Biden campaign is also preparing its team of lawyers. The elections could come down to 9 Supreme Court judges. Most of them, by the way, are Trump supporters, Amy Coney Barrett being the latest addition. So counting begins in a few hours from now, but do not expect the results in a hurry. Which brings us to question number 2. How is a U.S. president elected? The answer is simple. A U.S. president is elected through the Electoral College. What is an Electoral College and how does it work? That answer is not so simple. But here's the simplest explanation you will find. Take a look.
American voters do not elect their president. They vote for electors, or the Electoral College. It meets every 4 years and chooses the president. The Electoral College has members from all 50 American states. The number of electors from each state depends on its population. At 55, California has the highest number of electors. Wyoming, Alaska, and North Dakota have 3 each. New York has 29. In all, there are 538 electors in America. Each has 1 vote. To become president, a candidate needs 270 Electoral College votes. For 48 states, the winner takes all the votes. Meaning, the party winning the popular vote gets all the Electoral College votes. The margin of victory does not matter. 2 states are exceptions, Maine and Nebraska. They have a district system for allocating electors. Can an elector vote against the state's presidential pick? Yes. They are called faithless electors. In 2016, 7 Electoral College votes were cast against the state's wish. In 2016, Hillary Clinton had 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. Trump won because he was picked by the Electoral College. This year, the electors will vote on the 14th of December, as warned. It's a complex system. And you may ask why. Why can't Americans elect their president directly? The founding fathers of the United States believed that the electors could form a necessary buffer to keep the Americans from being influenced by a candidate. Has it worked? Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Question number 3, the biggest issues and controversies. I don't know where to begin, frankly. There were so many this election. Donald Trump's taxes, Hunter Biden's emails, Trump's Chinese bank account, the one he did not tell Americans about, Biden's health, is he fit for office, the question of foreign interference and proximity to China, who will take a tougher stand and punish China for the pandemic. There's so much that was debated in this election. So we'll dwell on the 3 biggest issues that Americans might vote on: the Wuhan virus, jobs, and racism. First to the virus. The US is the worst hit. It has the highest number of cases in the world, more than 9.5 million people. More than 230,000 Americans have died, 230,000. But Donald Trump believes he's done a fabulous job controlling the virus. Critics say he hid information and spread fake news. He called it a little flu. Then he tested positive himself. But he continues to junk the mask and mock Joe Biden, who, by the way, has not quite spelled out what he would have done differently to control the pandemic. Issue number 2, economy and jobs. Donald Trump was doing great before the virus from China came and ruined his report card. Hotels, restaurants, travel and airlines have all been hit now. Though GDP figures show that the American economy has grown at a rate of 33.1% in the third quarter, experts fear a double-dip recession and a record slowdown. According to America's Bureau of Labor Statistics, 12.6 million people are out of work. Can Donald Trump steady that ship? Can Joe Biden steer it towards a recovery? Americans can only hope that they make the right choice. Issue number 3, racism. America burned this summer. The death of George Floyd in Minneapolis triggered a wave of anti-racism protests. The video of Floyd saying he cannot breathe became a chant. There were protests across the country. Donald Trump called the protesters looters, and he was right. Many of them were indeed looters. He sent the military to counter them, but he failed to address the genuine concerns. He refused to denounce white supremacists. Joe Biden's own record on racism is not so great, so Americans aren't really spoiled for choice on this score. Question number 4. What about Indian Americans? How big a role will they play in this election, and who are they likely to vote for? 1.6 million Indian Americans are voting this year. They make up only 1% of the US population, but they have significant political clout, which explains the choice of Kamala Harris, the vice presidential pick of Joe Biden. It's an attempt to woo the Indian diaspora. But has it worked? Traditionally, Indian Americans have leaned towards Democrats. The trend may not have changed significantly this year, even though many in India seem to support Donald Trump. Indian Americans, according to recent opinion polls, are still backing the Democrats. Has Donald Trump not gained at all? Well, he has. In 2016, only 16% Indian Americans said that they will vote for Trump. In 2020, 28% of them say they support Trump. Do remember, these are only opinion polls. They tend to get it wrong more often than not. So here's how things stand. Both Democrats and Republicans have gone out of their way to reach out to the Indian diaspora. On the 4th of August, the Trump campaign announced the formation of a group called the Hindu Voices for Trump. 2 days later, the Democratic National Convention organized an interfaith service. The Republicans are banking on Trump's camaraderie with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the success of the Howdy Modi event in Houston, and the Namaste Trump event in India. The Democrats are banking on Kamala Harris's Indian roots. What explains the desperation to win the support of the Indian diaspora? Let me give you some numbers. As I told you, Indian Americans make up only 1% of the American population, but they own one-third of all Silicon Valley startups. 8% of America's high-tech firms were founded by Indian Americans. Consider all of America's Fortune 500 companies, 2% of them are led by Indian Americans. Examples include MasterCard, Microsoft, Alphabet, Adobe, and IBM. 1 in every 7 doctors in the US is of Indian descent. At least 10 Indian Americans are lawmakers. According to some estimates, half of America's motels are owned by Indian Americans. This section also happens to be very affluent. The median income of an Indian American household is higher than that of other Asian communities. They are an important vote bank, which is why both presidential hopefuls want to woo them. Which is also why they're talking about Indian food. It has become a political tool of sorts in this election. Especially for the Democrats. The vice presidential nominee, Kamala Harris, once famously tried impressing voters with her dosa-making skills. She ended up getting trolled for not being able to whip the dosa well, besides her views on the Indian government's policies, of course. And now one of her supporters, US Representative Pramila Jayapal, decided to dedicate a dish to Kamala Harris on Twitter. But she committed a blunder, and Twitterati are now savouring it. Our next report explores.
Americans may be at each other's throats when it comes to their political choice, but at the end of the day, there's one thing that unites them all: food. America is a melting pot of the world's finest culinary creations, each creation representative of a particular community. Political parties are well aware of this fact, and this election, they've tried using food to mobilize public support. In a video/PR stunt released in November last year, Kamala Harris, who was then struggling to protect her flagging campaign, teamed up with actor Mindy Kaling to make some masala dosas. A South Indian savory crepe filled with spicy potatoes. Harris couldn't smoothly whip up the dosa, and she couldn't really whip public support either. The Indian diaspora wasn't too charmed by her skills or her Indian roots. Critics dug Kamala Harris's position on Article 370. They made more headlines than her dosa video. Switch to November 2020, another Indian-American politician is being rebuked for using her roots to score political gains. Pramila Jayapal, the US representative for Washington's 7th Congressional District. Jayapal recently shared a light-hearted post about a dish she had prepared in honor of Kamala Harris. She called the dish paneer tikka. Twitterati savored the blunder. They began a trend demanding justice for the very dish, all the while poking fun at how mistaken the US representative was. Some called sushi paneer tikka roll. Some others passed off paneer tikka as rasgulla. Such was the backlash that Pramila Jayapal had to clarify with the recipe of what she had prepared. Turns out the dish was in fact paneer tikka masala with a little gravy. It may be too late for this food faux pas to influence the election, but it proves how Indianness became a political tool this election. Political candidates tried selling their Indian roots to sway the Indian diaspora, but found themselves in a soup.
I don't want to suffer the consequences of our future president not liking my Indian food. Can I just tell you something? Yeah, I've never made dosa.
Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
With that, it's a wrap, but our non-stop live coverage of the US election continues here on WION. Stay with us.